Okay, so perfect. So, um, I just wanted to, go over the topics, I sent to you last night. First and foremost, I just wanted to ask if you would mind telling the readers a little bit about your background, where you're from, your upbringing, what you do for a living, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great. So I grew up in rural South Dakota. There was sort of more cows than people in the towns where I grew up. My dad was a pastor. My mom worked for an adoption advocacy organization. I went to public high school, public elementary school, and actually went to the American Legion Boys State program, which was sort of my first foray into state and federal politics. I got selected to go to the national programs of Boys Nation. And there I was, privileged to meet President George W. Bush, Senate Majority Leader at the time, Tom Daschle, the other home state senator. But the guy that really impressed me the most was a younger guy named Congressman John Thune. And he was sort of the first person outside of my dad that I had seen demonstrate servant leadership. And he was one that really took the time to meet with his constituents. Anytime there was somebody from the home state in the office, he took time to personally meet with them. He walked us around the Capitol. I was kind of so impressed by him that I ended up going to school in Washington, D.C. I attended the George Washington University. I worked on his first campaign that he ran against Senator Johnson, that he lost by 527 votes. And sort of another, this is a statewide race, and almost a million vote sort of vote cast. And he didn't seek a recount. He opted instead to kind of take the high road, and instead came back 2 years later and ran against sitting Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle. I worked on that campaign as well, and kind of got to see him again take the high road and exhibit an issues, policy-focused, constituent-focused campaign that was ultimately successful. And I always kind of joke that the reason that Thune won that race was because I wore a chicken suit at the Meet the Press Tim Resser debate. So it was kind of fun to be early on involved in the political world. But ended up working for Senator Thune then, became his executive assistant over the course of a couple of years, working full-time while I was still in college. And I drove him to Walter Reed Medical Institute in 2007, where we met a young man who had stepped on an IED in Iraq, had lost both of his legs and was catastrophically burned on over 40% of his body. And he looked at Senator Thune and I, and he said, "Sir, the only thing I want is to go back to Iraq and be with my guys." And that was it for me. I had almost enlisted after 9/11. I had almost joined the military service academies. 3 months after that interaction, I was at Columbia, South Carolina. I had enlisted in the Army, and I deployed from I went to basic training at the same military installation my grandfather deployed to World War II from. I ended up going through a thing called Officer Candidacy School. I went to Airborne School. I became an infantry officer, went to Ranger School, and ultimately became a lieutenant in the Army and deployed with the 173rd to Afghanistan. And I was there winning hearts and minds was sort of the mission set. And, I didn't know it at the time, but there was a lot of similarities between what I was doing there and community policing, right? Like the law enforcement officials that are on the streets today are asked to be social workers. They're asked to be, marriage counselors. They're asked to be so many different things besides their day job, which is, enforcing the laws. Similarly, when I was in Afghanistan that first time, I was the Department of State guy, I was the USDA guy, I was the USAID guy, and I was also a second lieutenant in charge of a platoon of infantrymen in Afghanistan. And there's one story that always stands out that I like to tell. We engaged with the community. We did, again, kind of what I would describe as community policing. We had sheriffs. We sat down with the village elders. We used our funds to help build roads and create hospitals and establish that trust. And again, servant leadership, right? We listened to the constituents in Law for Afghanistan. And it paid off because one day we were headed to the Afghan border police where we were doing a joint training mission with them. And we received a phone call that said, "Hey, that route that you take every single time you go to this Afghan border police station, there's an IED on that road. And it's going to go off, and here's exactly where it is." So we were able to call in the EOD and positively work and engage with the local village leaders and elders in that area. And that's what I see in our local law enforcement is there's just so much positivity. There's so much great things that are going on. But, we do need to kind of take a look at how much stuff are they asked to handle, how many things are they sort of relegated with. So I came back from that first combat deployment and tried out for and was selected to 2nd Ranger Battalion, which is part of the Joint Special Operations Command. So it's SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, and the unit that I was in, 2nd Ranger Battalion and the Ranger Regiment. And I subsequently deployed on 3 more combat missions. I did Bin Laden-style raids. Certainly was not on that mission. That was 6, but we did a lot of other missions of that type. I was on over 75 raids, night raids, where we took bad guys off the target and made, America and arguably the region there safer. I came back before going on my 4th combat deployment, met my beautiful wife, Mindy, who grew up in the 8th Congressional District. She went to Auburn Riverside here in the 8th Congressional. And we came back. I ended up deciding to kind of hang up my spurs, so to speak, in 2014 after 7 years in the Army. Felt that I had done my service. I was proud to have brought everyone under my direct command home. That was still to date sort of my proudest accomplishment of my professional career. We did unfortunately lose a lot of guys in my sister units to my left and to my right. But we got out in 2014. I went to Columbia Business School in New York City. I got my MBA there. And sort of a symbol of the tenacity and every time I'm on the campaign trail, I talk to constituents about how hard I'm going to work for them. When I was trying out for 2nd Ranger Battalion, I actually ran on a stress fracture until I literally broke my leg. So I'd make the joke that I was a strong ranger, not a smart ranger. And then I, sort of barely got into Columbia Business School at the beginning, but worked my way over the course of 2 years to getting onto the dean's list when I left, right? So just, that watchword for me has always been hard work and putting, the needs of the men and women under my command before my own. It's what, we call servant leadership in the military. So got out 2014, went to Columbia Business School, came back, worked for Microsoft. I was a program manager there for a while. Left after about 2 years to be a director at a kidney dialysis company called DaVita, which is one of the 2 major private providers of kidney dialysis care in the United States. These are the most sick patients in the country. These are folks that need dialysis to stay alive 3 times a week. And there I got to see both the health side and the business side of delivering care. And we would lose about $250 on every single Medicare patient that we treated, every treatment, which is accounted for about 90% of our total patient population. The other 10% on private insurance subsidized the other 90% and paid for our operating costs and created the profit margin that we could operate in as a for-profit business. So that was sort of the first time when I heard, Medicare for All. I started to scratch my head, and I just didn't understand how that business model would work. But ended up going from the healthcare industry to work for Amazon, where I was a senior vendor manager, had about $100 million profit and loss that I managed to help them launch a new grocery store chain. And that got me up to about, I think it was around March of 2019, when unfortunately a good friend of mine chose to take his own life. And it was sadly not the first time that had happened, but he was sort of my mentor on my first combat deployment. And a few days after that, a fairly liberal member of Congress made the point that the VA ain't broke, so let's not fix it. And then proceeded to make this case for the need for broader socialized medicine and broader government control of the healthcare industry. And for me, that was sort of a second call to service moment where I had seen personally and had gone through, the VA system to receive care and found it occupied with fantastic physicians and social workers who wanted to help, but who were really hindered by red tape and bureaucracy. And then I juxtaposed that next to some relatively, in my opinion, out-of-touch members of Congress who wanted to force that on the entirety of the United States. So that's when I decided to kind of explore sort of where I was in the Bonnie Lake area and try and determine whether or not my current representation was really truly representing the district. And I quickly found that Congresswoman Schreier was not. And in conversations across the ground over the last year, I've heard that message consistently and repeatedly, that Congresswoman Schreier is not listening to her constituents, that she's voting out of touch, that she's more concerned with pleasing the party leadership than she is with serving the constituents of the 8th Congressional District. In those conversations, I was able to garner the support of some local legends, Congressman Dave Reichert, who is a former King County sheriff. He's the guy that caught the Green River Killer, the most prolific serial killer in the country, and former member of Congress, and he represented the 8th Congressional District, so I'm proud to have his endorsement. Former Attorney General Rob McKenna, former Senator Slade Gordon, Congressman Dan Crenshaw, a host of local organizations, all the sheriffs in the eastern side of the district have endorsed me. Proud of that. The Washington State Farm Bureau has endorsed me. And again, just to close out, I think what we have seen on the campaign trail has been 100% echoed in the results of the primary. And you know this because you wrote about it, but it's about a 95% confidence interval predictor in Washington State. The primary is of the general election. We saw the exact same thing in 2018. Dina Rossi got 43% of the vote. The consolidated Republican field was at 47. The consolidated Democratic field was around 52, 53. $30 million were spent on the race. The results didn't really change, right? You know, the things consolidated, and that's where we saw. So we're extremely happy to be on the other side of that mathematical equation moving forward into the November election.
Yeah, wow, that was awesome. Wow, that was a lot of great information. And that kind of leads into a question I was going to ask already, and you kind of answered it, which is, was your campaign at all surprised at the results? I mean, this took, one of the reasons I wrote the article was because, the results took a lot of people off guard from what they were expecting. And, I was wondering if your campaign was also taken aback by what happened, or whether this was kind of expected.
We weren't surprised by the sentiment. As I said, we've been hearing time and time again and talking to folks. Congresswoman Schreier in one of the debates in 2018 compared our orchardists, so the people that grow cherries and apples, their use of H-2A visas, she compared that to indentured servitude. So right off the bat, the good doctor did not endear herself to a lot of the folks in Central Washington, because that is the lifeblood. If you talk to a lot of the legal immigrant farm workers, as I have, they will tell you that there are dentists and doctors who come to Washington State to earn a substantial amount of money that they can take back and support themselves and create a better life for themselves in Mexico, and that this is, sort of net a good thing for both sides of the equation. We weren't surprised, as we had been saying time and time again, that Congresswoman Schreier was out of touch on a lot of important issues. She voted against rural broadband access. There was an opportunity to condemn the Chaz and the CHOP in Seattle. She voted against that resolution. She voted to cut $22 million of Bryan criminal justice assistance grants, police grants, away from local and state law enforcement. So she's really kind of been in lockstep with the left of her party in the defund the police movement. She did not condemn the Seattle City Council. She did not speak on Chief Carmen Best's resignation in Seattle. And people question, well, Jesse, Seattle's outside of your district, and that's fair. But what is absolutely true is the cops, firefighters, and medics who work in Seattle live in my district. They live where I live. They work in that city, and this is making them demonstrably less safe. So to finally answer your question, we were not surprised because we had heard these sentiments time and time again. We were shocked at how low she was. Our hope was that we would have kept her below 50%. 43.31%, I think, is incredible, and should absolutely move this race into the toss-up column. Anyone who says it's not a toss-up is not paying attention or does not understand Washington state politics.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's definitely insightful, and it sounds like you guys, were gauging the attitude on the ground even before these results, and that again also kind of leads into another question. You mentioned this, but obviously, police reform has been a big hot-button issue. In contemporary political discourse, especially over the last few months. You obviously have a section on it on your campaign website. You've mentioned policing, multiple times already. But especially given, how big of an issue it's been in Seattle and in Washington State with Chaz and CHOP and, whatever you want to call it. How have you seen that issue talked about by voters? How have you tried to talk to voters about that issue, and what kind of impact do you think it's having on the race, if anything?
Look, we know that 84% of the folks in the 8th Congressional District support local law enforcement. Like, we have polling on that is supported 100% in conversations that we're having with folks on the ground. We also know that police and sheriff's departments need more funding, not less, to be able to do their job effectively. Police body cameras are not cheap. Training, anti-bias training, is not cheap. The results in Seattle clearly demonstrate that cutting the police force is the best way to reduce diversity amongst the ranks. And we saw that in Seattle with, of the 100 sworn officers that were cut, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 95% of them were minority hires. So, we're seeing just sort of time and time again that the language and the discourse and the political slogans on the left are unfortunate, and they're causing real harm. That said, I have conversations with Pastor Lambert in Auburn, who is the only black pastor in that city, which is the largest city in the district. Mm-hmm. I have talked with Mayor Backus, who is the mayor of Auburn. On Friday, I am sitting down with the chief of police in Auburn, and I am trying to understand and to commend them because they have been able to affect actual change without setting anything on fire. And the reason that they've been able to do that is because there has been such a prodigious effort at bridge building. And that is another big watchword of our campaign is servant leadership, right? Mm-hmm. No one asked me in the military if I was a Republican or Democrat. They just wanted us to get the job done. And that's exactly what the city of Auburn has been able to do. The previous police chief had a complaint section on the website that if you filed a complaint, it took you back to the homepage. And that was intentional. And so they have completely changed the way that they listen to their local population. And we need to model that and emulate that because, in my opinion, some of the best ideas come from those in the trenches. That was my philosophy in the military when I listened to my riflemen, and that will be my philosophy if I'm elected to represent the men and women of the 8th Congressional District, is I'm going to listen to the folks that are on the ground, that are actually doing the job, and that are doing the job effectively.
All right. Awesome. That makes sense. That was, again, another really insightful answer into how you're running your campaign. And that leads into another couple questions I have just kind of about the nuts and bolts of your campaign. And mainly one thing I wanted to ask about was the geographic diversity in the 8th District. You've mentioned, obviously, a lot of events you've done and, some conversations you've had in and around Auburn, which is the city's largest district. Your wife grew up there, I think you mentioned. So, obviously, the 8th District, though, stretches from Auburn, which is the Seattle suburbs, all the way out to some more rural areas in the middle part of the state. And so how has your campaign tried to manage that kind of geographic diversity and that kind of size? Because the 8th District is a fairly large district geographically.
Yeah, and give me 1 second, Kraz. I'm actually going to start the car and may switch over. Just give me 1 second.
Ron.
Sorry, I just want to confirm you can see me okay.
Yep. Good. Yep, still hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so the 8th Congressional District is massive. It's 7,000 square miles, and as you said, it ranges from Issaquah, which is sort of a tech-heavy, high-tech center, down through Milton, Bonning Lake, into Pierce County, which is consistently becoming more and more sort of red. And then it stretches, as you say, out east through Ellensburg, which is the home of Central Washington University, Radio City. It's one of the sort of biggest area for farming out there. There's a lot of Timothy Hayfield, Anderson Hayes, bigger employers. Goes up through Kashmir and to Wenatchee and Chelan, where you have a lot of orchardists. So very few congressional districts in the United States cover such a diverse group of constituents. And the thing that we have tried to do is to listen to everyone. I am fortunate to have grown up in a ranching and farming background, so that is a subset of the population that I absolutely understand.
until I went off to college and went to Microsoft and Amazon. I really had no exposure to sort of high tech, but again, that is something that I did professionally. There's a 10% veteran population in the 8th Congressional District, of which I am a member. So there are just so many different touch points that we feel that I am uniquely qualified to speak to, that we have really tried to, again, provide everyone ample opportunity to be heard. And, this is certainly something that we're going to continue to do, that we want to really make sure that is front and center in our campaign. My campaign manager is a woman. We want to make sure that, the fact that I'm a white male does not detract from who we are listening to and who we're talking to. As I said, Pastor Lambert is one of our sort of closest members of our kitchen cabinet, a black pastor out of Auburn. And again, we're trying to make sure that the incredibly diverse and fiercely independent 8th Congressional District is heard. Those voices are heard in all aspects of our campaign.
All right, yeah, well, that makes sense. That was a good way to touch on all the different parts of the district. And then also, I did want to ask, briefly, like you said, this race really hasn't been on many people's radars up until now. So I guess I just wanted to ask, how do you intend to more get on the radar, both nationally and in the state? And, if you'd be willing, would you be able to share any insight into, what your campaign thinks the general election against Congresswoman Schreier looks like, at this moment?
Sure. Sorry, just to recap, your question was, how are we going to gain national attention, and what does the election look like in November?
Yeah, or like if your campaign has any insights in terms of numbers into that, and if you'd be willing to share them, what your expectations are at this moment and what your numbers might say.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you've written about it a little bit, but the top two sort of jungle primary is so unique in the United States that there's very little understanding of it outside of Washington State. Essentially, what we just did is we conducted a 243,000-person poll with a 0% margin of error. And we know that the consolidated Republican field is winning this race, right? So, that would hold true if this were held in a vacuum. Certainly, fundraising is going to be important. We have seen, a lot of interest and a lot of money coming in the door, which has been incredible, and we're going to continue to see that. We absolutely believe we were already on the National Republican Campaign Committee's Young Guns list. That is something that we will continue to move through the various levels of that sort of designation at the national party level. And we have already been fielding interest from sort of national news organizations and the like. So we're going to continue to see the 8th Congressional District be a bellwether. This is a Cook Political Index even district. And as I say, this has been represented for over 30 years by Republicans. I'm proud to have Congressman Dave Reichert's, the previous occupant of this seat's endorsement. I'm proud to have the son of Jennifer Dunn, Reagan Dunn, a King County Council member's endorsement. This is, something where we have sort of all aspects of the 8th Congressional District. I'm proud to say that I had James Mitchell, who was one of my conservative Democratic opponents, has endorsed me. I've got a call with the independent in the race to sort of secure his endorsement. And again, we've just got such a groundswell. Folks on the left, folks on the right, and folks in the middle agree Congresswoman Schreier is not right for this district. She hasn't been paying attention to this district, and the primary results show that.
That's a very insightful answer. And definitely something we've seen, with the jungle primary numbers, something you touched on. But you did mention fundraising. So I did want to ask you to expand on that a little bit if you can. If and if you'd be willing to share, has your campaign brought in, significant fundraising since those jungle primary results came in?
Yeah, again, as I say, we are seeing a lot of folks making sizable donations. We certainly understand there's a lot of interest there, and we will be happy to share it at our next financial disclosure.
Okay. All right. Awesome. I only have two more questions, and then I'll let you go. But the first one is about the competitiveness of the race. So obviously, one of the reasons that this wasn't on the radar was because it's a Hillary Clinton won district. And the national polls are generally considered to be not super favorable for Republicans right now. Do you think that the national environment, and specifically, do you think the president is going to have an impact on this race?
I mean, Tip O'Neill said it best: all politics is local, right?
Mm.
There's a lot of things that are going on in the 8th congressional district that the national organizations and the national media have not been paying attention to. And it's interesting. Congresswoman Schreier said recently that she's been, quote, happy to vote with her party because the nation feels very confident in the direction of the Democratic Party. And that very well may be true, but it is not true in the 8th congressional district. And she has been running a sort of nation first, Nancy Pelosi first. She has a 100% voting record with Nancy Pelosi and a 95% voting record with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She also has a credibility problem. She went from saying she was going to be a pediatrician and a mom, a moderate who's going to work for everyone in the congressional district, who may not even vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. Fast forward again, as I say, she's been 100% in lockstep. Certainly, President Trump is very popular with certain aspects and certain voters in the 8th congressional district, and he's very much not popular with other voters in the 8th congressional district. What I will say is a 4-tour U.S. Army Special Operations combat veteran with 4 tours, as I say, and 2 Bronze Stars, I'm always going to support the Commander-in-Chief. That's true of George W. Bush. That was true of Barack Obama when I was a soldier under both of those leaders. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be true under whoever is the next president of the United States. I personally am a Republican. I'm voting for the Republican nominee for president. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to agree with him on every issue. I will vociferously defend the fiercely independent 8th congressional district, and I will do what is right for the voters of the 8th congressional district always, regardless of who is in the White House. And I'll also say that I'll be able to work with whoever is in the White House. Congresswoman Schreier was door-knocking in October of 2018, telling voters that she was going to go to Washington, D.C. to impeach the President of the United States. And she did exactly that, and she has accomplished very little outside of that.
All right, well, that was a great answer. Definitely insightful and detailed, so I really appreciate that. And very direct, so I definitely appreciate that. And then last question, we always like asking this one, but if you're elected to Congress, what would be your quote unquote day one issue, some people call it, or the first thing you'd really push for as an elected representative?
Right, and if you would have asked me that before, call it February of this year, I would have given you probably a completely different answer. But COVID recovery is going to be very much the day one task, right? I believe that we need to protect lives and we need to protect livelihoods, right? We need to contain the spread of the virus. We need to treat those that have the virus, and we need to protect the vulnerable populations that have it. Unfortunately, those on the left have completely ignored the livelihoods portion of that statement. My opponent said that recently we don't need to go to restaurants and we don't need to gather in groups of 5 people or more, and voted for a nationwide $15 minimum wage. That is a perfect recipe to kill small businesses in the 8th congressional district. So I will focus incredibly hard on getting us out of this sort of triple or dual crises that we see with the economic crisis and the healthcare crisis. That said, one of the other key issues that I'm going to work on is transportation issues, right? There's an opportunity for us to create a conduit, a public-private partnership to get more of the Timothy Hay in Ellensburg out to our ports and remove semi-trailers in the process by expanding the height of Stampede Pass. Again, this is super local, small ball stuff, but this is what's important to the voters of the 8th congressional district: jobs in central Washington and reducing traffic in western Washington. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I could go on for another 5 or 6 issues here, Kraz, but I won't. I'll stop unless you want me to. I'll keep going.
You can. I was gonna say next. If there's anything else you want to say. So if you want to keep going on about local issues, you're welcome to. But if there's anything you want to say that you want to get out there, feel free.
Look, well, yeah, I think the one other thing that I would say is, The thing that I support is lower taxes, lower regulation, a strong national defense, and I think that's absolutely what I'm going to go to Washington to fight for. I believe that we need to take care of the men, women, and children here in the 8th Congressional District. We need to focus on constituent services. I had the honor of speaking with General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, early on in the campaign, and he shared after we had about a 30-minute conversation, he said, Jesse, we need more young guys like you, guys who are willing to knock down the bad ideas on the right, knock down the bad ideas on the left, and make the middle bigger for everybody. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get stuff done and accomplish things in D.C. for the voters of the 8th Congressional District, and not to support one party or another, which is exactly what Congresswoman Schreier has done for the last 2 years.
All right. Well, awesome. I mean, yeah, that was, a great set of answers. I really, really appreciate, you taking the time to call and, answer our questions. I really also appreciate, that you like the article. So if you have anything else you want to say, I'm happy to hear it, but otherwise, I'll let you go, let you get back to talking to voters and, talking to constituents. But again, I really, really appreciate this. And the article should, be transcribed and out probably early next week.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing that I would say is I was embedded with journalists in Afghanistan, or I guess they were embedded with us. So, I think that part of the the crises that we have going on right now is this attack on media and on journalists. So, again, keep up what you're doing. You're doing great work. We are an incredibly free, greatest country on earth, in my opinion, because of our freedom of press and our freedom of speech. So, just a tip of the hat to your profession. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And, best of luck during the rest of the campaign, and in November. But yeah, again, thank you so much.
Yeah, reach out on November 4th. We'll give you one of the first interviews when we win.
No problem. Absolutely will.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks much.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.